Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Spincast. Today, we are joined by Caliber Jacob. He is a number of things: community caster, content creator, and a film student, specifically within the Rainbow Six Siege scene. He also has his own podcast called the Hammered Podcast about the Siege, competitive Siege in particular. So without further ado, I don't want to introduce you for you too much. So introduce yourself, tell us your past, kind of how you started in esports, where it came from, playing split screen back in the day, middle school, all the way to where you are now, and kind of we'll go from there.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a current film student. I've spent the past 4 years right out of high school doing stuff within the film industry. I live in Denver, so Denver's a wonderful underground film industry because Colorado does not get tax incentives to form unions or get massive crews together. So if people want to film in Colorado, they have to come from a state that offers that and then come out here. But there's a wonderful underground industry that's been in Denver. I've been a part of it for the past 5 to 6 years. It's a wonderful place, and within that whole scope, it's been really, really easy to create content and to try to foster a couple of presentation or broadcast skill sets just being within a film school ecosystem. It's been super helpful to just figure out really what I can do within the tools that I'm given, and film school is a wonderful opportunity to do that. Within the esports ecosystem, I don't know, I got into it rather late, believe it or not, even though I have a nice, soapbox or pedestal that I'm able to do stuff from now. I wasn't a console kid. I think the first console that I probably ever had was my parents stole a Wii from my old church in 2009, 2010 or something. That was the first time I really was able to sink my teeth into it. So I've really only been gaming for, the past 10, 11 years or something like that. It hasn't been super extensive. But when I had the opportunity to game, I was doing it as often as I could. I remember I went to a STEM high school, and that is where you're basically supposed to have a laptop with you 24/7, and the curriculum is all done online, even if the internet sucks, because everybody at my high school was hacking the Wi-Fi to figure out how to hack things. That's just kind of how that's how my high school functioned. And what I would do is I would steal my laptop late at night, and I would pull all-nighters whenever I didn't have something super strenuous to worry about at school the next day, and I would just play whatever it was, if it was an FPS, if it was an MMO, an RPG. I've been within the video game space for such a long time, and something that helped translate into film school is that I had a big love of story, and then that story love translated into being a shoutcaster for esports. It's been Rainbow Six through and through. That's the only game I've really ever sunk my teeth into, but just wanting to find a way to translate a whole bunch of things that if you can find any storyline that you think is relevant or anything that you can really attach yourself to as a viewer, as an audience member, that's something that I wanted to help translate into the world of esports and video games, because all of that stuff just kind of culminates into one big mutual love of everything, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more there. I think that's something so special about the community in esports, is that I think we all have our individual story, and then it all kind of piles together into something really unique, usually pretty unique to the game itself, especially in the esports realm. It's kind of divided a little bit based on what you focus most of your time on. I know that kind of switching gears a little bit, I know you have your own podcast, the Hammered Podcast, about the Siege competitive scene particularly. So take us through kind of what developing a podcast looks like for our viewers out there, in particular with, in that competitive scene of Siege, what that podcast looks, what you focus on, and kind of how you got it off the ground and into a pretty successful podcast as it stands now.
So the Hammered Podcast, we actually just shortened it to Hammered when my co-host Chowder and I were coming up with the name. We were like, you know what? We don't want the or podcast. We just wanted to be called Hammered. We're just this is really succinct, super simple. It kind of cuts out the flack in a sense. So we like it a lot. Hammered is an environment where we can bring on people within the Rainbow Six esports scene, more specifically, sometimes the broader Rainbow Six scene in general, whether it be content creators or prominent community figures. But we take them on to discuss the game in a more competitive sense, whether that be what's currently happening at the highest level of the Siege esports ecosystem, if that's high level competition or tournaments or play days or whatever that might look like. But we do it in a way that isn't super, we don't have to take ourselves super seriously, so we don't expect everyone else to also take us super seriously. We might bring on somebody who is a prominent guest. We've had some people that Chowder and I both really revere in the scene that we have a lot of respect for, whether it be a shoutcaster or a pro player. We've had Pengu, probably the most like single-handedly most well-known player within the Siege. And we brought him on to discuss some kind of serious things, but we didn't have to take it, like as if it were an interview, like on a live broadcast. Like, so it wasn't like he was there for an hour and a half talking with us as trying to like represent his organization, or like needing to take things as serious as you would have to in like a post-game interview or something. So we take that. It's a super casual environment. It's very laid back. It's not something where we don't have sponsors or anything, so we're not trying to, no one's for lack of a better term, holding a gun to our head and being like, you have to do this way, right? Like, you have to be super funny or take things, like no one's dictating the format that we use. And one thing that's been super helpful about trying to make that work is Chowder and I just have a lot of natural chemistry. He and I've been able to bounce ideas back off one another very well. We work together behind the scenes very, very efficiently, and everything that we do on the podcast has always turned into it's almost like a father-son relationship, where he kind of takes on the dad role, and I'm just there going, okay, Dad, shut up. We need to get this podcast episode. Like, please just be quiet. But it works out in a very comical, like lighthearted sense, and probably the best way or the biggest way in which the podcast, I think, has really succeeded is because he and I are able to bounce back off one another very, well, without too much conflict. And we already know that the environment that we're creating for guests to come on doesn't need to be taken super seriously.
Yeah, for sure. I really, I've seen a good number of them, and it's really exciting to see that casual just discussion about games that everyone loves, right? Obviously, you and Chowderhead love it, and then your guests do as well, and really just developing conversation out of there, either for the betterment of the game or just for entertainment purposes as well. So switching gears, talk about the film student a little bit. I want to talk about like the parallels between the two, right? Because we always kind of harp on that, like you can take so much skills from relevant industries into esports, or vice versa, right? The skills you develop competitive gaming and then apply them into a relevant industry as well. And I think you actually kind of might have like the best of both worlds with your background in competitive sports and talking about competitive sports or esports, and the film as well. So kind of give your approaches, opinions on how you're taking your film student skills and then kind of your podcasting esports skills and like kind of morphing them to pay the bills, so to say, right? So to say, to succeed.
Yeah. So before I jumped into the film school space, I suppose, before I really knew that was what I wanted to focus on for a major, I already knew that I was kind of like a dramatic, I guess, showman kind of person. Like, that was just a skill that manifested itself. My father is a pastor and my mother is a professor. So it's, you kind of have to, find a method of projection and be very confident with what you say. So when I went into film school, I noticed that there were also some acting courses, and I had done some acting previously, even though that's not necessarily my forte. I think I'm probably better behind a camera than I am in front of a camera, but there was still an opportunity to try to foster those skills in a way. And when it comes to the content that I create, the podcast that I do, anything that it comes to casting, like most things in esports, does rely on having a strong personality and having a lot of charisma. I don't necessarily want to toot my own horn when I say that, but when you have so many other people saying, hey, this kid is loaded with charisma, there's no way, I am not going to use that as someone who is very aware that the things that people say about me are the things that can help like propel me to different portions of an industry based on the work that I do. I know that I can take that skill and I can use it, basically wherever. So within the film school space, there were opportunities to flex and to showcase those skills and continue to develop them, which was phenomenal. But then the rest of a film school program, like I mentioned, with the whole storytelling aspect, my major within film school is screenwriting and film directing. So I'm very much the one who wants to take charge of a story and who wants to try to find a way to make it manifest as close to the image in my head as I have. And being within the film school environment just helps to foster those abilities and those creative skills more so just by being there, by talking with the people that you eventually become friends with, or perhaps even go into collaboration on projects with or crew up with in any sense. Being on sets themselves and figuring out what that sort of teamwork-like environment is like, and being able to work on your technical aspects, whether that be from handling a camera or setting up microphone or lighting or anything to do in the editing booth, any of that kind of stuff. It gives you a very more, I guess, or a lot more respect for what an industry that's that busy is like. Because when I entered the film industry, it was very, I guess, easy to lump everything into, well, we're going to make movies, and then everything just kind of happens. But then you realize exactly how much work you're supposed to put in, and it changes your opinion of an industry like that more, like, for the better.
Mhm.
And to be able to, I've been in that industry for 5 to 6 years. I've been in film school for 4, and I should be done in about a year's time. And that entire time has been trying to figure out, what can I take away from a film school environment and translate it towards something, I guess, a little bit more normal, because film school is kind of a niche thing when you think about it.
Mhm.
But
For
being
sure.
able to just analyze the things that I can take away from an environment such as that and translate it towards something I think I enjoy a little bit more fluidly, which is to say esports, it
Mhm.
makes it a lot easier to I don't want to say call my time in film school a waste, because it's very difficult to get jobs there. So
Mhm.
if I'm able to find a method of translating those skills towards something different, then I kind of call that a win in my book.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you were just saying over that responses, storytelling, video editing, light effects, all that kind of great stuff that readily translates into, I would think, esports production in general, right? For event production, I think that's something that's extremely relevant right there, just off the top of my head. So
Hmm.
absolutely. Kind of going back to, shedding the light on what film, like what you experienced in film school itself, in that you were exposed to the behind the scenes, so to say, and you're like, oh my god, I have so much more appreciation for this. It's not just making movies and seeing what happens.
Hmm.
What my next question for you would be, tell us what that is, but for like casting and production behind the scenes for your past work with community casting, and even your podcast as well, kind of like the complexity and the layers that you've installed to really boost the production value in your projects that you're partaking in, if that makes sense.
See, a lot of that, just, I know that comes down to the way in which I'm able to present myself, whether on a camera or on a microphone. I'm very well aware that a lot of the selling points that I have come from the way in which I'm able to present.
Mm-hmm.
Like anything that I do. If that comes down to creating a YouTube video to talk about a specific talking point, or being on a podcast, just being there, just being present. A lot of that has come down to just trying to develop my sense of self-awareness. And I know I entered film school. I entered college when I was 17. I didn't have a car. I was still very much green. And coming from a STEM high school environment means that it's I don't want to say it's more sheltered, but it's definitely a challenge to go from an environment such as that, where you're going to high school with quite literal rocket scientists and chemists, and then going into something that's more, I guess, free and less restriction based, as a
Mm-hmm.
creative industry can be. And it was really, really interesting to work on myself as a person to the point where I felt confident enough that I could use these talents in a way that put myself out there. It really did take a lot of courage to kind of want to step out of that shell. I think before I started doing this, I think I was still like very introverted. I wasn't super like willing to be outgoing with my skill set. Like, I could talk anybody up for as long as I wanted to, but when it comes to everything that we've talked about so far, the content creation, the podcasting, and the community casting has all come down to being able to speak openly and not feel like you need to hold yourself back. um, when analyzing a lot of stuff for community casting and trying to figure out the best method of projection, it's come down to looking at what a lot of other people within the scene have already done. And that's not even mutually exclusive to esports casting or Rainbow Six casting. I've wanted to get into stuff within sports since I started watching football in like the mid 2000s, and then just like listening to like what they would do. I'd sit down with my parents and watch Sunday Night Football, and sometimes they'd turn to me and go, "You know what, you could probably make a career out of this." And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
really? like do you seriously think that? They're like, yeah, absolutely. So I just listened to like the cadences that some people would use, the way that they would exercise different dynamics to help amp up really important moments, and to try to keep like explain things on the side until a really exciting moment came up in a game,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's something you can absolutely translate from different sport to different sport. It's the same idea across so many different areas of the industry, and it made it really easy to come into an esports realm where everything is a lot harder to understand, just because it's not something that everyone would have grown up watching nearly as much as a sport that you would watch on like
Mm-hmm.
cable television or something.
Mm-hmm.
So in my case, it was finding a way to really use my voice, break myself out of my comfort zone by just trying to do it over and over and over again, and then analyzing what so many people have already built up public presentation to be. And then once I felt really good about presenting myself and finding a method of projecting my skill set as someone who can utilize his voice, knows he looks good on camera, things like that, I was then able to translate that towards the casting, the content creation, the podcasting, all of that just works out, but that's after you find a base as a presenter, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's some incredible insight with like that very, holistic approach to all the skills you're trying to, mash together to present yourself, right? On camera, on microphone, etc., and have that kind of published product, so to say, in yourself, with all of your skills kind of compiled together. So I definitely see all of that happening and have seen it happen with your work in Rainbow Six Siege, obviously. Kind of looking towards the future, you're still a student now, you're still a community caster. What does the next step look for you in terms of success? Where do you hope you end up? Is it somewhere on the content creation side, somewhere on the casting side, somewhere in the middle? Like what would be your goal endpoint as you continue to, seek that long-term success?
I think at this stage, it's more about just trying to gather more of the relevant experience. I have made a big point over my whole life of trying not to pretend that I'm really an expert at anything, even though there are people that will probably, come and ask for advice or ask questions about stuff. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions like that. But the problem is I'm also still like developing and learning things. And I wholeheartedly acknowledge that I'm by no means a master of really any trade. I can dabble in a lot of different things like I've already explained, but trying to really, really hone in on one of them, to me almost kind of feels like a betrayal to everything else. When I jumped into film school, I had two other really big interests. One of them was video games and procrastination, because obviously, which translated into this later, but that's not a bad thing. But the other thing was music production. And that to me is a really big, important just part of how I process things creatively. And about 3 years into film school, I made the decision that I wasn't going to, wholeheartedly focus on one thing. I wanted to find a way to dabble in as many things as I could. And the same thing translated into the way that I really try to work on like career end goals, because I don't necessarily feel as though, I can hit a mountaintop in one thing, but then I'm going to feel like I'm kind of leaving something else behind, just because that's kind of how things go. If you focus on one thing with, all of your heart, your effort, your attention, then something will just inevitably fall by the wayside. In my case, I love the community casting aspect. I've loved shoutcasting for a while. Being able to, work events as a primary shoutcaster or as a desk host or an analyst or something like that, being primary broadcast talent to me and being able to, get to that level is something I'd love to do. But the way that I've engineered my career has been to take the content creation, the podcasting, all of the stuff on the side, and then kind of use that as a portfolio to say, hey, can I go try this casting thing? So it's almost like I have to utilize the opportunities that I've been given through everything that isn't casting to use it as a way to potentially get additional jobs or more exposure, or kind of just use it as a portfolio or a body of work and say, I know what I'm talking about. I'd love to continue to work on this. Will you give me a chance to do that? It's manifested itself in a couple different opportunities. Being a community caster in the first place, an offer came up to cast Rainbow Six North American Challenger League, which was about 5 to 6 weeks over the course of the past couple of months. That league is now over, but it was a really, really good experience, because you're not really going to understand the best method of doing what you want to do unless you get your hands dirty and do it. And doing Challenger League was a wonderful opportunity to figure out like how I work within a community casting sense. And now I can take that and hopefully work on, other leagues or other projects in a similar capacity. And working on all the content and everything else on the side is, again, something I'm hoping can help me get to that stage in my career at some point. So I guess the answer to your question is I kind of want to do everything in the hopes that one day all of that can eventually produce one offer for something really big down the road.
Yeah, for sure. Compiling all of your assets in one portfolio, like you're saying, is something fantastic. I think that portfolio for yourself is building very quickly and is always big. Kind of on that last point of that portfolio, this is the last question. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, sadly.
It's all good.
But I was saying earlier that the primary audience really is younger students that are looking to, okay, what do I do next? How do I take my love of gaming and apply it to esports for either playing professionally or finding a job or something in the realm of esports that they love to do for that success for a career? What advice would you have for them to help them build that portfolio that you've been talking about this entire time, basically, of really trying to like test the waters in a bunch of different things, but also still kind of have like a streamlined goal in a sense to make sure that they're staying on path, if that makes sense? So what advice would you have for those younger, the next generation, so to say, and just enhancing their skills and building their portfolio so when the time comes, they're ready to apply, so to say?
One thing I can probably, or the thing I think I've said to the majority of people who've asked me questions similar to that is, record yourself. Record yourself a lot, because the best method of finding a way to improve is to look at yourself after you've done whatever it might be. If you're trying to play professionally, and you can go back and analyze the way in which you play if you're recording yourself. If you're trying to find a way to cast or produce something, record yourself. Go back and look at the way that you do it, because you can give yourself a very, very good hard look and find the things that you might, oh man, I didn't do that right. And it might be, like cringy, and you might sometimes recoil, because I know sometimes I do that when I'm going back and watching a previous cast. I'm like, man, I didn't do that part quite right. But the idea is you can take a look at it, and you can give it a really, really good look over to find the things you really dislike about it, because you're not going to be an expert when you start something out. You might be very gifted, but you're obviously not going to have everything figured out until you're in the space that you want to succeed in, and you learn more from those mistakes. Best way to figure out how to learn from those mistakes early on is if you have the ability to just keep a record of how you do things. And maybe it's something that you can also give to other people if you want to ask someone else for advice on how you're doing something. It's far easier for you to do that if you have something that you can send them, especially in esports, where it does come down to, networking between so many different people. It's not something that you're really able to effectively do by yourself. So if you have the ability, if you have the means to do that, whether as a player or someone who wants to get into a related industry within esports, and you want to dive into that kind of stuff, I think that's probably the thing I've said to most people who have been curious about, like, just how do I get better?
Yeah, for sure. On that similar note, I always say that, see failure as an option to improve, right? I think failure gets harped on, especially in the playing style. Like, if you lose, like, oh my God, you get down on yourself, and then it just starts to spiral, right? But okay, learn why, or figure out why you failed, and then learn how to get better. Like I said, similar to that point. Unfortunately, we're out of time. This was a fantastic episode to Spincast, I believe. We talked about, really that holistic, encompassing approach to esports that I personally think is just overlooked a lot by a lot of people, right? Esports, oh, you play video games. It's like, no, there's a ton of other stuff that you can do. And kind of putting the light on all of those parallels, both in the industry and like right next to the industry, is just fantastic. So thank you for coming on the show. Real quick, plug yourself. Tell us where the viewers can find you if they want to, listen in for your casting or listen to the podcast or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of my networks can be found under the same username, Caliber Jacobs, CALIBERJACOB. It's all one word. There's some people that try to make it two words, and I absolutely hate when they put a space in between both of them, but it's all good. Caliber Jacob, and that's on Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter primarily. Whenever I'm doing some sort of work for someone else as a community caster on my Twitter account, I will often tweet out a link to where that broadcast is happening. Sometimes it's on my networks, and sometimes it's on someone else's, but my YouTube channel is a place where I hone all of those presentation skills, create content, upload episodes of podcasts and things like that. So if you were to just Google the name, then you should be able to find all the spaces where I've done something on the internet, and hopefully I can continue to expand as we just keep trucking on this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, we're all kind of here to expand esports anyway and turn esports from the next big thing into the big thing, right? I think we're at that tipping point very shortly, hopefully, that it actually tips and it becomes the big thing of the world for sure.
Yeah.
So once again, thank you for coming on. To our listeners, thank you. Stay healthy and stay happy in the current pandemic. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. Be cautious, be safe, and then ultimately, stay plugged in.